Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you another fascinating guest today involved in creating a better tomorrow for all of us. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Kathryn Huff, who is Assistant Secretary at the United States Department of Energy and head of the Office of Nuclear Energy, where she leads their strategic mission to ultimately advance nuclear energy science and technology to meet United States energy, environmental, and economic needs, ultimately realizing the potential of these advanced technologies and leveraging the unique role of the government in spurring innovation in the domain. Prior to her current role, Dr. Huff served as senior advisor in the Office of the Secretary and also led the office as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy. Before joining the Department of Energy, Dr. Huff was an assistant professor in the Department of Nuclear Plasma and Radiological Engineering at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she led the Advanced Reactors and Fuel Cycles Research Group. She was also a Blue Waters assistant professor with the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. Dr. Huff was previously a postdoc fellow in both Nuclear Science and Security Consortium and the Berkeley Institute for Data Science at the University of California, Berkeley. Did her Ph.D. in nuclear engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, her undergraduate degree in physics from University of Chicago, and her research focused on modeling and simulation of advanced nuclear reactors and fuel cycles. Dr. Huff is also an active member of the American Nuclear Society, a past chair of the Nuclear Nonproliferation and Policy Division, as well as Fuel Cycle and Waste Management Division, and recipient of both the Young Member Excellence and Mary Jane Ostman Professional Women's Achievement Awards. She's also very active in open science and through her leadership with the software carpentry, SciPy, and Hacker Within, and the Journal of Open Source Software. She's also advocating for best practices in open and reproducible scientific computing. And aside from all the literature she's published in the peer review domain, she's also an accomplished author of a book on computation and physics, Effective Computation and Physics Field Guide to Research with Python, which can be purchased on all major booksellers. We're honored to have with us today a lot of interesting things to get into. Dr. Kathryn Huff, thank you so much for taking the time to come on our show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really very kind of you to invite me. Thanks.
It's great having you. I would love to start off sort of, I think back around 2004-ish, I think the date was, when you first arrived at Los Alamos Neutron Science Center as not even a college student at the time. I think you were still in high school. Talk a little about the early days and when you first caught the nuclear bug.
Oh, yeah, it's true. So I went to a very strange high school called the Texas Academy of Math and Science that takes place at a university. And so I sort of for 2 years was quasi high school or quasi college student. And that gave me an excellent opportunity to spend two summers actually, at Los Alamos as a research undergrad. But I was young, right? I was, not yet out of high school. I was under 18. I was still a minor. And I got to work at the end of the accelerator there at Lance 3. I had really, only the slightest idea what I was getting into. But it was fascinating, right? I did neutron science and computing for the first time. I learned the Perl programming language, fell in love with regular expressions and nuclear physics. And I had, just the greatest time out there in the desert learning about the beginnings of the Manhattan Project. There are a lot of, real life scientific heroes in the story of all of that sort of otherwise dark history of what we ended up doing in the Manhattan Project, but gratefully, the thing that certainly came out of it was nuclear energy. And that's sort of where I found hope in that broader story around the making of the A-bomb.
Yeah, and so things start off there. You spend a lot of time developing your sort of intellectual interest in physics. Come 2013, you publish your dissertation entitled "An Integrated Use Fuel Disposition and Generic Repository Model for Fuel Cycle Analysis," which sets the stage for a couple really important themes that I think we see over the next decade in your work, where you basically are taking knowledge of fuel cycles, of disposal of waste, and sort of the third sort of part of that, simulation, computer sciences, and really understanding the details, whether it's in old school reactors or next, down the road, molten salt and some of the advanced reactor design you're getting into. You designed this very interesting software system called CIDR, which merges with an existing one called Cyclist, which was focused on fuel cycle systems at the time. Talk about how you chose these themes, because I think they're very pertinent nowadays as well. But 15 or so years ago, it was neat seeing you working on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, such good. I was lucky to have an excellent PhD advisor. Paul Wilson at the University of Wisconsin has real vision about what it looks like to think about nuclear energy in the context of the broader energy system, our missions around climate change mitigation, and the real challenges of the systems around nuclear energy, the fuel supply, securing it, the fuel cycle, just making it sustainable, and the reactors at the heart of that black box, right? And he was inspired to turn some software ideas into reality through a series of tools. Vision was one that he collaborated with in the context of the National Laboratory, Idaho National Laboratory. And Cyclists started out as something called Genius. When I started in grad school, I worked with another PhD student on converting Genius into this new tool, Cyclist, that would sort of be a fuel cycle analysis tool based in C++. It's object-oriented, it's agent-based, it has a lot of excellent modern software techniques, or at least modern at the time, that enabled scientists to really explore their favorite reactor concepts in the context of a broader system and say, ask and answer questions like, if we deploy X number of reactors to meet Y demand curve for electricity, and they are of this Z type, how many grams of technetium-99 are in the repository 400 years from now? Yeah. And that sort of question really underpins a lot of open policy questions and questions around how we can deploy reactors to meet our real needs. And it becomes less of a technology-driven deployment space and more of a mission-driven deployment space, if you can answer those questions. And so my development of CIDR was because, there was certainly an interest in generic repository analysis in the context of options other than Yucca Mountain. And I learned a lot about clay and granite and other geologies when I was doing that modeling and simulation. But, I had the opportunity to do some of that work physically at Argonne National Laboratory during my dissertation project. And that was really beneficial to me as well, as seeing more and more national laboratories.
Awesome. I also, you aside from the slew of professors and collaborators that you thank in your dissertation, you have a bunch of collaborators with interesting names like Animal and Wolfman and Slayer. I guess they're on the hacker side of stuff, and I thought that was kind of cool.
Wow, you really do your research. Yeah, we had a bunch of fun code names in the Hacker Within, which was a club sort of based on finding the hacker within yourself. Again, inspired by Paul Wilson, the best PhD advisor in history. He encouraged us to sort of work together to develop our skills in scientific computing, and we all had fun kind of hacker names. I was South Side because I had lived outside of Chicago for a while.
Cool. I never had a cool nickname like that, but I thought that was pretty neat as well. So moving on from that, you also publish, as we move in sort of the era of these more advanced reactors. You publish on, I guess, a similar system called Maltris, where doing some similar types of things with simulations in molten salt reactors. And then the theme in different presentations that you give, I think you gave one at the 2020 American Nuclear Society Conference on artificial intelligence and once again, further understanding the molten salt process. I think you even wrote a chapter in a book on this thing in Science Gateways and Artificial Intelligence. Talk about how sort of, I mean, obviously AI is kind of a hot topic nowadays. Some people are scared about it, but whatever. In this particular case, again, because you're dealing with so much data, these really unique processes. Talk a little bit about AI coming on the scene, machine learning and specifically in your domain, and how that's sort of impacted your work along the way.
So I think it's really important that nuclear energy continue to be at the forefront of computational science. It has been since the very beginning. The development of the Monte Carlo algorithm was, driven by the diffusion equation in neutron and in neutron transport in general. And that Monte Carlo algorithm became the Metropolis algorithm became MCMC, which underpins all kinds of Bayesian approaches, which underpins the PageRank algorithm that's behind the Google recommender system. And now you've got a whole situation where nuclear applications and the sort of fundamental challenges of our stochastic differential equations at the heart of our challenges have driven some of the biggest computing challenges of our time and created tools that are useful across domains. And so now we have tools that are generated outside of the nuclear engineering domain that can be brought in and really advance the way we do optimization and integration, the way we solve these stochastic partial differential equations. And leveraging those tools is the only way to stay ahead, right? I think it's, you mentioned AI is pretty scary, and that can be true. And I would say the one thing that you often hear, not just are there threats to our national and human security based on AI, but also people are worried about their jobs, right? Will, robots and AI steal their jobs? And the answer from my perspective is certainly not. People who know how to use AI will get the best jobs. That's who's going to steal the jobs, right? And so I think there's a real opportunity here to ensure that nuclear engineering uses every tool imaginable. In the context of AI for nuclear engineering and simulation, we have really complicated multi-scale, multi-physics problems where you have physics on the scale of neutron interactions at the, angstrom level, like very, very sub-meter, 10 to the negative 10th meters, 10 to the negative 14th seconds, right? All the way up to meters and minutes in the context of the flow around of coolants around the reactor.
Yep.
And combining those physics, particularly in like stiff multi-physics scenarios where they impact each other, where the flow impacts the temperature and the temperature impacts the neutronics. Now you have neutronic thermohydraulic multi-physics that has to be tightly tied, but is across 24 orders of magnitude in time and space. And that is a big problem that only really big, complicated data solutions can really get to detailed and high resolution answers, which we need for, real confidence in our reactor safety.
Excellent. So now you're at these actually dual roles. You're assistant secretary at the DOE, head of the Office of Nuclear Energy. Take us a little bit through sort of your day-to-day responsibilities now, because clearly, when one goes to the website, you're a lot going on, all the advanced reactor designs, the molten salt, the small modular stuff. Where do sort of directives come from on a daily basis? We profiled, some thought leaders on the show in the past from some of the various DOA innovation ecosystems like PNNL and Lawrence Livermore. Talk a little bit how you interface with some of these groups as well as industry, because you're sort of the center, you're sort of the epicenter of all of this stuff. What's your day like after you come in the office and talk to me?
Yeah, so my day it really varies day to day because there's so much action sometimes. A high priority item will take over the entire day. But most days, I get in really early, I have a check-in with my team, and then I have back-to-back meetings with all kinds of important stakeholders. And those meetings sometimes are virtual, sometimes in person, sometimes I'm traveling places to go meet, particularly on the international stage with nuclear newcomer countries and nuclear collaborating countries and the nations that we rely on as part of our supply chain. I think we have a really excellent system in this administration right now. Of course, I serve at the pleasure of the president. I'm a presidentially appointed Senate confirmed official. And, I'm lucky to have an administration with real vision on clean energy. And we are actively implementing the congressional direction passed through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act on what we need to do to get to a clean energy system. Clean electricity by 2035, net zero by 2050. These are extremely lofty goals. And it's implementation season right now in DOE. We've got the resources we need and we've got to just push to make it work. The secretary, of course, also is a visionary leader in this context. And, it's my pleasure to support her when she is testifying before Congress and executing our mission and interacting with stakeholders. And nuclear energy is a sort of fundamental key part of our clean energy system. And that is recognized to the fullest extent by our administration. And I think that's really helped my office focused on nuclear energy R&D, deployment and demonstrations as well. We have a real, a clear direction that nuclear energy deployment is going to be a key part of this transition. And so the research and development we do at the national laboratories under my office, the deployments that we're doing through the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, the Loan Programs Office and our collaboration with them as they consider a future of more nuclear deployments. As you know, the 2 Vogtle units are coming online this year. We have one of them almost fully operational and the other has just finished hot functional testing. And we're in a place where those reactors have been supported for a while by the Loan Programs Office. And now there's an opportunity for that office with a lot more loan guarantee authority to support future reactors as well. So, I think we're in a place where it's a whole of DOE approach to ensure all of our clean energies get deployed at the sort of scale that is truly historic with the resources that we have from these 2 recent laws. That's also historic. And so it has been a very busy time. All of that, of course, also punctuated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine last year, which centered bad behavior around nuclear facilities right at the core of its war on, energy systems in Ukraine. They used energy and are currently continuing to use energy as a weapon of war, in particular, the capture and continued occupation of a nuclear power plant at the center of that war. It's been very interesting to be in DOE as the world responds to that kind of behavior on the world stage.
Yeah, I was thinking about that one as well as something that I had Liddy Everett of the IAEO on, and that was one of the things they asked. I was like, what do you say? Don't have the fight over here, please, near the power plant. Just take it down the road a little bit. But yeah, no, that's it's hard to believe that in 2023 that we still but that's a topic for a different show. Let's talk a little bit about some of these programs because you have a lot going on, and one of the I think most fascinating, well, they're all equally fascinating, but it's something called GAIN, Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, where you point out that sort of the private-public partnership model is obviously so crucial in whether we're building the small modular reactors or something much larger. Again, you have companies of all sizes, from the General Electrics to startups, nuclear tech startups. Talk a little bit about what that's all about and how you think about the public-private partnership model per this era that we're in.
Yeah, I think, we love a public-private partnership in DOE these days, and a lot of the bipartisan infrastructure law provisions enable some of those. But, we've been doing that in NE for a little while now through GAIN and through the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. The collaborations that GAIN is able to enable is, it's across the national laboratories as well as industry. They release industry funding opportunity announcements under our budget to ensure that there are ways for us to sort of at a small scale support advanced reactor developers and nuclear energy supply chain commercial interests as they get through the regulatory system or get through their engineering design phases to reach real commercialization. And a public-private partnership has the benefit of de-risking some of the really early stage capital investments necessary for a technology. So a technology like nuclear that's, can be complicated, at best complex, and certainly has very high standards of safety, security, safeguards, and those kinds of things. It makes sense for the federal government to help with the capital risks and the regulatory hurdles to make sure that these are being deployed with the highest standards of all of those things, and de-risking the challenge that private industry alone might, balk at. And so by de-risking through some cooperative agreements, helping with oversight, engaging them through national laboratory collaboration, the DOE can help industry really meet their goals faster and with more certainty. And I think these public-private partnerships are an excellent model for turning one American taxpayer dollar into many American dollars of investment through the private industry. Because there's a lot of investment that's going to be required to build out the infrastructure for this energy transition, lots and lots in the trillions, right? And the federal government can't spend trillions on energy all by itself. It's going to take private industry, and collaborations between government and private industry can get us on the right path.
And to support that industry, that as it's evolving, we also need world-class workforce behind it. And again, this is something else that you have going on there in the Nuclear Energy University program that was established a few years ago, but ultimately to not just excite, but really invest in this next generation at the university level. Talk a little bit about this program, because I think this is an exciting piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, so we are in a really lucky position that our congressional direction in my office includes a serious intent to the maximum extent practicable, fund university-directed research and development. Up to 20% of our R&D budget should be dedicated to this. So to the maximum extent practicable, we should get to 20% of our R&D going toward university-directed research. And that enables a whole fleet of things. It enables universities to do high risk, high reward idea generation, to collaborate with industry and national laboratories and GAIN even, to enable new designs to be born, which then can be taken up, if they're great, or new concepts or new ideas or processes, new fuel cycles, new repository science, can all be born at a high risk university setting under the direction of, brilliant faculty, and then be filtered up into space of national laboratory exploration, which, if it survives through the national laboratory R&D, then an idea can even be born into commercialization. We see this with NuScale. For example, this is a reactor company that's public, and it's building a reactor under DOE public-private partnership in Idaho. It's building a 6-pack of small modular reactors under the Carbon-Free Power Project, and it was born as a university award. A faculty member, developed this technology, spun it out into a company, and now it's a publicly traded company with international deployments on its, on its timeline. They should be ready within the decade, connecting to the grid in Idaho, possibly also Romania and other nations. And that's the dream, right? A technology like that being born from a high risk environment through federal support, turning into a real reactor design and moving through. It has NRC design certification, a DOE public-private partnership, and even international commitments.
Very cool. Very cool. And I just have to ask, because we love to profile sort of the future of what's going to be going on up there, as well as on the terrestrial front, which obviously is where you're focused, but you also do have a little piece on the in the portfolio in space and defense power systems, and specifically powering deep space missions. Just say a few words about that, because I think that's just extremely cool. That obviously, there's not going to be a lot of people up there for a little while, but nonetheless, you're thinking about, whether it's a colony on Mars or whatever it may be, that we got to power it somehow. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the most fun ideas that we get to help think about at the federal government level are the ones we get to think about with NASA or with DOD when they think about fission surface power for, deployments on the moon or Mars, where we have a real space station up there. We're going to need power, and that power needs to be reliable. And nuclear reactors are an excellent option for that. We also, through my office, help NASA put plutonium generators into their little RTGs into things like the Mars rover. And it has real impact, right? We can help with, by providing nuclear energy systems, whether it's RTGs or, helping NASA determine what fission reactors they want to put someday on a planet. That is a real collaboration that allows us, with our nuclear energy expertise and our nuclear energy capabilities out, for example, at the Idaho National Laboratory, to genuinely fuel things that, NASA needs for our exploration of the cosmos.
Yep.
And I find it really cool that, I think a lot of people recognize that there is a nuclear component to some of these devices, but the extent to which there are, there's a real need for nuclear devices in space, I'm not sure most people realize, but it is one of the only options that we have for really long-term energy on, a planet away from us. We can't ship diesel to the moon, and you need constant power. People's lives will be at stake on a space station. So, anyway, it feels very much like the Kim Stanley Robinson Red Mars, Blue Mars, Green Mars, but it's becoming very real. You have a real future in which there's a possibility of these space stations being powered by a reactor. We're happy to be engaged with NASA and DOD as they think about these options.
Yeah, it must be exciting to be involved in those projects. That's just really cool. You mentioned, as one of your responsibilities is the public facing initiatives. You get out there quite a bit. I saw that a couple months ago you were at North Carolina State giving a talk on clean energy and nuclear innovation. You recently signed a memorandum with Finland, and I think you're going to be in Abu Dhabi at a Congress coming up in a couple of weeks. What do you do on the international scene? What are some of those? Obviously, nothing confidential, but what types of cooperations per our nuclear science and technology policy do we get involved in at the secretary level when you're out there on the road?
Well, I think it's really important to say a couple things. So one, our international nuclear energy cooperation has many facets. Inside my office, there's an international nuclear energy cooperation office with a deputy assistant secretary all of its own and a handful of staff, a small budget that comes out of my sort of program direction budget. And it supports technological support for nuclear safety in nations across the world that need our subject matter experts occasionally to help make decisions abroad. We have the largest fleet of nuclear reactors in the world of any nation. The United States has more reactors than anybody else, and we have more experience and more human hours and years dedicated to our expertise. And so we do have a lot to offer, both from our national laboratories and our industry with other nations. And on a government to government level, that can be an important, friend builder. And we recognize in my office and across the federal government that a nuclear accident anywhere is a nuclear accident everywhere. And so we have a very sort of magnanimous approach to ensuring nuclear safety abroad. My office, as well as the National Nuclear Security Administration, both have a lot of attention dedicated to the continued safe operation of these plants everywhere. And so some of that is embedded in our multilateral and bilateral relationships with lots of countries. And there's a number of different categories of multilateral relationships. You can think of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the OECD NEA, all kinds of organizations like the World Nuclear Association and the International Energy Agency all have equities in the context of multilateral civil nuclear cooperation. And we get to engage in those. Sometimes there are subgroups and working groups, and I get to, occasionally chair a session in these contexts, or have bilateral meetings where we really engage those other governments on what it is they need, what their new plans are, how we can connect them to our American technology and industry, how we can help them as they address, questions by their public. But the number of nations that we have bilateral relationships with outside of those multilateral relationships is also very long. And some of those are existing nuclear nations that we see as key allies in all of our civil nuclear missions. Think the France, UK, Japan, et cetera, that have really robust nuclear energy in their nations. We've had long-standing relationships on the civil nuclear side, both in R&D cooperation and in civil nuclear commercial deployment engagements. The supply chains are tightly tied across our nation and other nations, both on the fuel side, on the components side. And there are other bilateral relationships that are just as exciting in the context of nuclear newcomer countries. So, the global South has a lot of interest. Central and Eastern Europe has now faced what it looks like to have real concerns about energy security and recognizes the potential role for resilient, clean, small modular nuclear power, and even gigawatt scale nuclear power. We've seen, some historic agreements. Westinghouse intends to build 3 reactors in Poland, for example. And some of those interactions require some government-to-government engagement between DOE and our counterparts, our regulator, NRC, and their counterparts, our Department of Commerce, the U.S. Trade Development Organization, the Defense Finance Corporation, the Export-Import Bank. All of them across the interagency have a role to play. And it's not just the State Department, making some of those engagements happen, because some of them have to happen on the technological R&D level, which gets to land in my lab, or on the regulatory level that lands in the NRC's lab. And so I've been really excited to have opportunities with, a number of nations, Ghana, Finland, India, the list is really long. And I would say, it's a great time to be in conversation about nuclear, because the world is attentive both on the energy security side of things and on the incredible urgency of our fight against climate change. And when you combine those two things, many nations can do the math and say, oh, look, nuclear is an option here.
Hey, does fusion flow through your department as well? And I know Lawrence Livermore, sort of, because I had the folks on there at the ignition facility. I wasn't sure sort of how do fission and fusion sort of get along in the sort of the corridors of the Department of Energy nowadays. Are they ever have fights or conflicts, or I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's an important question. So my office is focused on fission energy. The Office of Science has a fusion energy sciences division, because at this stage, the fusion has a lot of science remaining to do for real commercial designs to be ready. But ARPA-E, right, the energy DARPA, if you will, also has a fusion program that's supporting some fusion startups. And of course, there's just an incredible amount of private interest in new fusion startups. NNSA is responsible for that ignition at the National Ignition Facility. NNSA being the National Nuclear Security Administration. Right. I don't run any of those offices except for the fission one, but we still have a role to play in helping, right? And the roles are the following. One, a lot of the science is actually really similar between fission and fusion, things like materials information, nuclear neutron cross sections and nuclear interaction cross sections around certain materials, data that we should collect, regulatory approaches with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, ways that we've seen technology around a radiological environment, accelerate their licensing capabilities or decelerate their licensing processes. We can help inform the fusion community as they start on that path. They're embarking on something that nuclear energy, like fission energy, has been on for a while. And so we've learned a lot of lessons that we're trying to help them incorporate, especially in terms of material science and the interactions with the NRC. But broadly, I would say our lessons are also in the very boring, practical, commercial approach, where it can be very hard to turn the understanding of a reaction into a profitable commercial device. And fusion is embarking on that right now. And so we have a lot of sort of do's and don'ts that we've learned over time that we hope that they'll learn from, because it is certainly the case that both fission and fusion will benefit from supporting each other. The fusion community and the fission community can both make real headway by ensuring that, we're working together. And while there's always some, skepticism about the timelines on either side. And sometimes you'll find individuals lobbing, criticisms at each other. I think it's important that we, are all part of one single nuclear team. And actually, most nuclear engineers and plasma engineers were educated in the same departments. You may recall from my bio that my former life as a professor was in the nuclear, plasma, and radiological engineering department, right? So fusion scientists and fission scientists both take my class, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Can we, I mentioned, in the bio of the show, your passion and interest in open scientific computing, open source software journal. You're on the editorial board. You were also on the editorial board of the journal of, I think it's called Open Source Education. Yeah, that was it. Can you say a couple words about this? Because I know that this is, I know it's not nuclear related, but it is still something of passion to you throughout sort of this journey you've been on. You mind saying a few words?
It is. I feel extremely strongly about science as a philosophy. And when you do science using computers, it needs to be just as easy to critique and understand as it is if you do science using an experimental benchtop device. And the reproducibility and transparency and openness at the heart of reproducible open science is really critical for me in terms of the trust of that science when we use it in the real world. And so I was really lucky to have, again, an excellent PhD advisor, Paul Wilson, as well as, the advisors I had at the national laboratories teaching me how to use computers well, and through cooperation and collaboration with a lot of colleagues in the open science universe, in particular, one mentor, Greg Wilson, a different Wilson, in Canada, we were able to, I have been involved in a community of open source science and software and open source education that really leans into making sure that scientists across the planet recognize the importance of reproducible open scientific software. Yeah. And in the case of the Journal of Open Source Education, it also leans into the importance of educators sharing the materials that they produce to improve the quality of education everywhere by enabling contributions. If everyone across the planet is taking calculus at some point, then we have, well, at least a large fraction of the people, then we have so many calculus teachers preparing the exact same lesson on integrals all the way across the planet. And gosh, wouldn't there be like some real efficiencies involved in sharing more of our lecture materials and lessons and capabilities, and doing so in a way that recognizes the public good of education rather than making it a sort of profit exercise. So the Journal of Open Source Education has the philosophy of driving toward a situation where you can publish some of your lesson plans and whatnot around whatever it is you're teaching. And if you make your lesson plans open source so that folks can see and contribute to them and use them and reuse them under liberal Creative Commons licenses and such, free as in speech and free as in beer, then you have this universe in which people could truly collaborate and reduce the amount of time they spend on higher quality content for people when they learn. The same is true of open source software, and the Journal of Open Source Software and the Journal of Open Source Education, Joss and Jose, if you will, are really dedicated to creating a platform for which academics can get credit and distribute their work in a way that makes sense for academic credit models and incentive systems, to kind of give them an opportunity to get a little bit of credit for the work that they do, to make sure that their work is transparent and open and reusable.
Okay, I mentioned in the again in the bio of the show that along the way, as you've been on this journey, you also had the opportunity to publish a book, Effective Computation in Physics. Again, talking about sort of we have physicists that more and more have to be, as you were, software developers at the same time, and ultimately teaching these dual skills. Say a few words about what it was like writing this book, and on the cover is this bobtail squid, which I understood for the publisher, the O'Reilly Group, puts these rare sort of endangered species on the book, but I thought it was kind of interesting. I don't know why they chose the squid, but because of the symbiotic relationship that this squid has with this bacteria that makes them glow in the dark and all that cool stuff. I don't know if that had some relationship to sort of the symbiotic relationship between physicists and computer scientists, but talk a little about this one, if you would.
Yeah, I also am still not entirely clear why they chose the bobtail squid, but I just love it. This squid, of course, has these like glowing bacteria, and as you say, it's symbiotic, and just so cool. And it's also very tiny, this sweet little squid. It's huge on the book, but they're little bitty. I have a very close friend, Anthony Skopatz, who has been a collaborator for a long time and is just a joy to be around. And he one day decided that we should write this book together. And it was a project that we did over the course of about a year while I was a postdoc at Berkeley. And so I would wake up an extra 2 hours early and take the train into Berkeley and then sit at a coffee shop for 2 hours and do as much writing as I could about effective computation in physics. And that was the experience of writing the book. Is my friend talked me into it, and we split the chapters half and half. And, I wrote really early in the morning at this sweet little coffee shop in Berkeley before I did my real job every day. And it was surprisingly popular. It definitely needs an update, the poor thing. It's quite out of date. It's pre-Python 3. But it was very popular because it mostly focuses on a number of tools that people need outside of just the language itself, like, version control and regular expressions and all kinds of things like this that are the kinds of things you have to learn through experience, but every scientist is eventually going to need. So it has a chapter on each of these things that we believe to be important. Testing your code, for example, which is especially important in science. And I really enjoyed the process of putting it together, in part because, it was a joy to work with my friend Anthony, who, is a fantastic writer. Actually, if you want a fun exercise, that book has half chapters written by me, half chapters written by Anthony. And you can tell the difference between my chapters and his because he's very good at puns and I am not.
Got it.
So some of the chapters are chock full of really cute little jokes, and some of them are like a little bit more dull. And those are mine, the dull ones. So yeah, I mean, it was a joy. And, a lot of folks in the scientific Python and universe were very appreciative of having it all in one place. And I'm actually aware that, a number of academic institutions have classes that now use this as a required reading and whatnot, but it does need an update, the poor thing.
Well, I thought the convergence theme that which is something I'd love to touch on, in this case physics and software programming and sort of stepping outside the silos and all that, was just pretty cool. And again, just a neat part of the picture that of everything you've been involved in. I mentioned next week you're going to be Abu Dhabi at the World Utility Congress. Anything else public facing coming up in the next couple months or 2023 conferences, talks you're going to be giving, places that we may be able to listen to you, meet you possibly? Anything else hot on the schedule? Please take the floor.
Sure. I routinely have the honor of testifying before Congress, and there will soon be a field hearing in Wyoming coming up, I think. So maybe watch the Senate Energy and Natural Resources page for some of that.
Okay.
So if you happen to live in Wyoming, that may be a fun time. We have, I think, on the really big international stage, there's a lot of attention on a conference that will be coming up in Goa in India, the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation Conference that's on the sort of sidelines of the G20 here. The Goa conference will be an opportunity, a lot like a conference. It's sort of the next step that it follows last year's equivalent conference in Pittsburgh that DOE was able to host, called GCEF, the Global Clean Energy Action Forum. And on the side, just after that, I'll be in Mumbai doing a civil nuclear working group. So I'm excited to go. We'll be present there, thinking on the world stage about clean energy in Goa. And I expect there will be a lot of nuclear energy interest. And of course, at the end of the year, COP28. When we think about the global climate conference, and the presence of nuclear historically has not been really high, but I expect to see that changing. I went last year to COP27, and you could see the real sort of shift towards having more attention on nuclear energy in that context, and I expect it'll only grow next year. So I would watch this Clean Energy Ministerial in Goa and the COP28 meeting, of course, which will be in the UAE.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, and it's an amazing portfolio. I hope you don't get too tired from doing all this traveling, but I'm thankful that you're on the road looking after all these issues, as executing on the strategic mission of moving things forward and on these various fronts, both for science and our economy and just innovation overall. And very, very exciting stuff, Katie. And I really wish you the best with all of it. Again, for everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. Katie Huff, Assistant Secretary, United States Department of Energy, Head of the Office of Nuclear Energy, doing really amazing things to meet the United States energy, environmental, and economic needs along the way. Katie, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while on these themes. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there at the DOE. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for everybody via what you do. Really great story.
Thanks for that. Yeah, of course, I only represent the tip of a huge iceberg of federal employees and national lab staff who are really executing this mission. So, of course, I'm grateful to be here to talk about all the work that they've accomplished.
Great having you.